My name is Olivia Thompson, and I'm 32. If you met my parents at a barbecue or saw them smiling in a family photo, you'd probably think I was lucky. The kind of close-knit family people envy. The kind where everyone shows up for birthdays, where the group chat is always buzzing, where the parents talk about values and responsibility. But in my family, responsibility wasn't a value. It was a sentence, and I was the one who got it. I grew up as the reliable older sister, the kid who didn't need much, didn't ask for much, didn't cause trouble. Not because I was born mature, but because I learned early that needing things in my house made you a problem. My younger brother, Jackson, was different. Jackson was the sun, and the rest of us, we were just planets expected to orbit him quietly. From as early as I can remember, the favoritism wasn't hidden. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even denied. When I was wearing thrift store jeans and hand-me-down sweaters, Jackson strutted around in Nike and Adidas like he had a sponsorship deal. When I needed school supplies, my mom would sigh dramatically and tell me money was tight enough to make me feel guilty for asking for pencils. But somehow there was always enough for Jackson's newest gaming system, the latest iPhone, the limited edition sneakers he just had to have. And the worst part? They didn't even act like it was unfair. They acted like it was normal. By 16, I was working part-time after school at a grocery store, stocking shelves, bagging groceries, wiping down sticky conveyor belts until closing. Not because I wanted extra spending money, because my parents made it clear if I wanted a car, college money, or even basic things sometimes, I needed to contribute. Meanwhile, Jackson was encouraged to be a kid. Let him enjoy his youth, my dad would say, as if Jackson's youth was some rare and delicate thing that had to be preserved at all costs. I still remember coming home after a late shift, my feet aching, my uniform smelling like bleach and old fruit, and seeing Jackson sprawled on the couch, controller in hand, laughing into his headset. He didn't even look up. Not because he was cruel, because no one had ever taught him to notice. The pattern continued into our 20s like it was carved into the foundation of the house. I worked my ass off to put myself through state college. Loans, 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I took semesters off when money got too tight, and it took me 6 years to finish what most people finish in 4. Jackson got a free ride to an expensive private university, courtesy of my parents emptying their savings and taking out Parent Plus loans like they were pulling candy from a bowl. He partied. He switched majors 3 times. He found himself. He came home on breaks with new stories and new clothes and new expectations. And whenever I tried to talk about how reckless this all looked, how dangerous it was, my parents shut me down fast. Because that was another unspoken rule in our family. Olivia can be useful. Olivia can be quiet. But Olivia can't be right. My parents made terrible financial decisions right in front of me like they were performing magic tricks, confident the audience would clap no matter what happened. They took out a home equity loan to fund Jackson's semester abroad, then panicked about payments. They maxed out credit cards for his fraternity dues, then juggled balance transfers like it was a hobby, all while telling me, with bright smiles and that false calm, we're investing in his future. When I expressed concern about their mounting debt, they brushed me off. We know what we're doing, Dad would say, like he was the CEO of common sense. Property values always go up, Mom would assure me, right after refinancing the house for the 3rd time in 5 years. I could see the train wreck coming. I wasn't even standing on the tracks. I was standing on the platform watching the headlights barreling toward us, and still, no one listened. And when things went wrong, because of course they did, guess who got the call? Me. The time Dad got laid off, I covered their mortgage for 4 months. When Mom needed dental surgery insurance wouldn't fully cover, I handed over $7,000 without hesitation. When their car broke down, I cashed in savings to get them another one. Not once did they ask Jackson for financial help, even after he was working. He's still finding his way, they'd say. We don't want to burden him. And they always said it like they were being kind, like they were being good parents. What they meant was, Jackson is the child. Olivia is the solution. I can't count how many times I heard, "You're so good with money. You're the responsible one. We don't worry about you." They weren't compliments. They were excuses. Little verbal stamps of approval that justified treating me like an ATM while treating Jackson like something fragile and precious. I didn't see it clearly for years because I wanted to believe in family. I wanted to believe loyalty meant something. That sacrifice would eventually circle back. But slowly, painfully, I began to understand the truth. In my family, love had a price tag, and I was the one expected to pay it. Even then, I stayed. I helped. I showed up. I kept pretending I wasn't keeping score. because some part of me still clung to this childish fantasy that one day my parents would look at me, really look at me, and realize what they'd done. That they'd say, Olivia, we're sorry. That they'd say, thank you. That they'd say, we see you. Instead, what I got, over and over, was that same familiar feeling. Being valued, only when I was useful. And the scariest part? By the time I turned 28, I could already feel the next request coming. Not the if, the when. Because families like mine don't change. They just tighten their grip when they start to fall. And my parents were falling. I could hear it in the strain behind their fine, in the way my mom's laughter sounded thinner, in the way Dad's confidence started coming out sharper, like anger dressed up as certainty. It was like standing under a ceiling that had been cracking for years, listening to the slow pop of stress fractures, and realizing everyone was waiting for me to hold it up when it finally collapsed. And I didn't know it yet, but the test was already on its way. It would arrive dressed as a conversation. It would come with soft voices and loaded words, and it would reveal, once and for all, whether I was a daughter or just the family's emergency fund with a heartbeat. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays were my longest days at work. Back-to-back meetings, deadlines stacked like dominoes. And when my phone lit up with Mom, I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Can you come by tonight? She asked, voice overly careful. Your dad and I want to talk about something important. Important. That word always meant money. Or Jackson. Or both. I drove over after work with that familiar knot in my stomach, the one I'd learned to live with. Their house looked the same as always from the outside. Trimmed hedges, freshly swept porch, the illusion of stability held together by appearances and denial. Inside, they sat me down at the dining table like I was being called into a board meeting. That should have been my first clue. Your grandmother would have wanted us to talk this through as a family, Mom began, folding her hands together like she was about to say grace. Grandma had passed a month earlier. She'd been quiet, stubborn, and, unlike my parents, meticulously fair. She'd split what little she had evenly between Jackson and me. Her house, a modest savings account. Nothing extravagant, just enough to matter. We know Grandma wanted things to be equal, Dad said, nodding solemnly, but equal isn't always fair. There it was. They explained it slowly, carefully, as if they were worried I might not understand a complex concept. Jackson had student loans. Jackson hadn't established himself yet. Jackson needed a boost. You, on the other hand, Mom added softly, you're doing so well. You've always landed on your feet. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They didn't say it outright, not at first, but they didn't need to. They expected me to give my share to Jackson. All of it. We just know you'll do the right thing, Dad said, like it was already decided, like my agreement was a formality. I stared at the wood grain on the table, tracing the scratches I'd probably made years earlier doing homework, while Jackson played video games in the other room. How much are we talking about? I asked, already knowing. About $45,000, Mom said, too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. $45,000. Money my grandmother had left me. Money that could finally give me a down payment. Breathing room. A future that didn't feel perpetually delayed because someone else needed saving. I'm not comfortable with that, I said slowly. The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet, offended quiet. Dad leaned back in his chair. Olivia, this isn't about comfort. This is about family. Mom reached across the table and put her hand over mine, her touch light but heavy with expectation. Jackson really needs this. You understand that, right? I did understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. That if I handed over that money, there would be another crisis, another reason, another emergency, waiting right behind it. I'm keeping my inheritance, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, firm, final, like I was speaking a language I'd never been allowed to learn. Their reactions weren't explosive, no shouting, no tears. Just disappointment, carefully curated. Mom's hand slipped away, Dad's jaw tightened. We thought you were different, he said quietly. And that was the moment it hit me. They weren't upset because they needed the money. They were upset because I'd stepped out of my assigned role. I left without making any promises, my stomach twisting as I drove home. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, searching for a version where I could have said no, nicer, softer, in a way that didn't make me feel like a traitor. In the end, I kept the inheritance. I used it exactly the way my grandmother would have wanted, as a down payment fund for a future that was finally mine. My parents stayed civil, cold, but civil. The real fallout came from everywhere else, Aunt Linda asked, casually. if I was having money troubles that prevented me from helping my brother. Uncle Steve suggested I was being unnecessarily rigid about Grandma's intentions. Cousins started dropping hints about family responsibility in conversations that had nothing to do with money. It didn't take long to realize my parents had been talking, spinning the story just enough to make me look selfish without ever admitting what they'd asked of me. Still, I held on. I told myself this was just a rough patch, that families fight, that things would even out. I kept showing up, kept helping when I could, kept believing that my loyalty would eventually be recognized. That fantasy lasted until the night everything finally snapped into focus. The night my parents showed me, publicly, unmistakably, exactly where I stood. Jackson's graduation dinner was supposed to be a celebration. That's what my mom kept saying when she called me a week beforehand, her voice bright and breathless. We're doing something nice for him this time. He's worked so hard. 7 years, 3 program changes, 2 academic probations. But sure, hard. They rented out a private room at an upscale steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the menus don't list prices and the lighting is designed to make everyone feel important. I already knew they couldn't afford it. I knew because 2 days before the dinner, Mom called again. This time her tone was lower, careful. We're just a little short this month, she said. Nothing major. Could you help us cover part of the deposit? We'll figure it out later. I transferred the money without arguing. At this point, it was muscle memory. The red flags were everywhere if anyone bothered to look. Dad's business had been struggling for years. Slow months bleeding into slower ones. Retirement accounts quietly rated to plug holes. They'd refinanced the house again 6 months earlier, this time at a higher interest rate because their credit had taken too many hits. Mom's new side hustle, selling leggings through a barely disguised MLM, was costing more than it brought in, but she talked about it like it was just one breakthrough away from success. Anyone paying attention could see it. They were one emergency away from collapse. The night of the dinner, I walked into the private room and plastered on my best smile. Jackson was already there, soaking up attention like oxygen. Relatives crowded around him, congratulating him on his perseverance and brilliance. My parents beamed like they'd personally earned his degree. I sat through 2 hours of speeches and toasts. I smiled when my aunt called Jackson an inspiration. I nodded when my uncle talked about his bright future. I even chipped in when someone ordered a $300 bottle of champagne, because of course they did. I told myself it was fine, that this was just how things were, that none of this was new. Then came the gifts. My parents stood up together, hands linked, commanding the room. "We are just so proud of you," Dad began, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything you've overcome, all the challenges." Mom dabbed at her eyes. "You deserve something special for this milestone," she said. Dad reached under the table and pulled out a small box tied with a bow. Inside were car keys. Brand new, glossy, unmistakable. Jackson stared at them for a second before realizing what they were. Then he laughed, actually laughed, and jumped up to hug my parents as the room erupted in applause. "Audi A4!" someone shouted. My parents had taken out a loan to buy my brother a luxury car. I felt stunned, but I kept my composure. I really did. I told myself to be happy for him. I reminded myself that I was still driving the used Honda I'd bought myself 8 years ago, but I pushed the thought aside. Then my mom nudged my dad. He nodded and reached for another wrapped box. "And Olivia," my mother said brightly, turning to me, "we didn't forget about you." Every head in the room turned. My stomach tightened. I unwrapped the box slowly, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching myself from across the room. Inside was a set of premium cleaning supplies. A fancy duster, organic multi-surface cleaner. Microfiber cloths, rubber gloves. "Oh," Mom said cheerfully, as if explaining a thoughtful surprise. "We know how much you like keeping your place nice. You're so organized and practical." For a moment, the room tilted. 20-plus years of supporting this family. Tens of thousands of dollars handed over without hesitation. Countless sacrifices. And this was my reward. Cleaning supplies. I don't remember what I said. Something polite. Something automatic. My body went into survival mode while my brain screamed. I excused myself shortly after, drove home in silence, and sat in my living room until dawn. That night I did the math. Every transfer, every loan, every emergency I'd covered. The total made me physically ill. The next morning, I made a decision. No confrontation, no dramatic announcement. I was done. I didn't blow up. I didn't send a long text or make a speech about boundaries or demand apologies that were never coming. I went quiet. Silence, I learned, is terrifying to people who are used to unlimited access. Within days, I found a new apartment in a different neighborhood, one they'd never had reason to visit. I opened new bank accounts at a different bank and transferred my money. I removed myself as a cosigner from anything I legally could. For the accounts I couldn't immediately detach from, I called the companies directly. "I will no longer be responsible for these payments," I said calmly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I changed my phone number, locked down my social media, told my workplace not to share my information. Every step felt surgical, clean, final. 2 weeks later, I was ready. I sat my parents down in their living room, the same one where I'd spent years watching Jackson be celebrated for things I'd quietly handled behind the scenes. "I'm moving," I said, "and I need space." The shock on their faces would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. "But why?" Mom asked, genuinely confused. "Is this about the graduation gift? Were you hoping for something different?" That stung more than I expected. "This isn't about the gift," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's about 20 years of being your backup plan while Jackson gets everything." Dad's face darkened. "Used," he snapped. "After everything we've done for you?" Something in me finally snapped loose. "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked quietly. "Name one sacrifice you've made for me that equals what I've done for this family." Silence. Not awkward silence, not reflective silence. The kind of silence that exposes a truth no one wants to say out loud. "That's what I thought," I said, standing up. "The Bank of Olivia is permanently closed." The next day I moved out completely. I blocked their numbers, limited contact with extended family who might try to guilt me, and for the first time in my life, I focused entirely on myself. The silence that followed was unsettling at first. No emergencies, no frantic calls, no subtle pressure disguised as concern. Just peace. I threw myself into work with a freedom I'd never felt before and ended up earning a substantial promotion. I started therapy to unpack decades of being conditioned to feel responsible for everyone else's failures. And somewhere in the middle of that, I started dating someone new, a man who listened, who didn't flinch when I said no, who never once made me feel like love was transactional. For 2 months, nothing happened. Then the messages started, casual at first. "Hey, sweetie, just checking in. Dad found this article and thought of you. We miss you at Sunday dinners." I didn't respond. The tone shifted. "Mom's not feeling well and keeps asking about you. The car's making a strange noise. Could use your advice. Jackson's struggling with his job search. Thought maybe you could help." Still, I stayed quiet. Then my aunt called. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just sighed and said, "You should really call your parents. They're having some difficulties." A week later, Uncle Steve showed up at my apartment unannounced. "Your parents might lose the house," he said bluntly. "I know you've got that inheritance money sitting around. Family helps family." I told him the money was gone, invested in my future, just like Grandma would have wanted. He left looking disgusted. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of you," he said over his shoulder. After that, the campaign went into full swing. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly cared deeply about my choices. Old family friends reached out, worried about me abandoning my parents. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one. The only thing that mattered was that I'd stopped fulfilling my role. And they were determined to force me back into it. My mother showed up at my workplace on a Thursday. No warning, no text, just her standing in the lobby like she belonged there, like she still had the right to access every part of my life. I was furious, but I swallowed it. Causing a scene would only give her leverage. Instead, I walked her across the street to a coffee shop, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The moment we sat down, she broke. "We're in trouble, Olivia," she said, eyes already red. "Your father's business has been failing for months. We're behind on the mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure." I felt nothing. No shock, no surprise. I'd seen this collapse coming for years. "Jackson moved back home," she continued. "He couldn't afford his apartment anymore, and now everything is just falling apart." She reached across the table and grabbed my hands like she used to when I was a kid, when comfort was just another way to redirect responsibility. "We need help." I took my hands back. "How much?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. 45,000. The same number. The same amount. Like it had been haunting us all along. "That would get us caught up," she added quickly, "on everything." I stared at her. "You want me to give you my entire inheritance," I said, "to clean up the mess you spent decades creating." "We'll pay you back," she insisted, her voice rising just slightly, "once your father's business picks up again." "Like you paid me back the 7,000 for your dental work?" I asked. "Or the 4 months of mortgage payments?" "That was different," she snapped. "Those were gifts. You offered." "And now," I said calmly, "I'm declining to offer." Her face hardened. I can't believe how selfish you've become, she said, after everything we've done for you. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. You and Dad have been turning your backs on me my entire life. The only difference is I finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. I stood up, dropped a 10 on the table for our coffees, and walked out while she called after me. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already buzzing. Texts from my father calling me ungrateful, cold, a disappointment. For a moment, the old guilt tried to crawl back in. I crushed it. That night, my phone exploded. Uncles, aunts, cousins, people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had strong opinions about my responsibility to family. I turned my phone off and slept better than I had in months. The desperation escalated. Jackson showed up at my apartment a week later, eyes red, voice trembling, but somehow still making it about him. It's just really hard living with them again, he said. And the stress. I might have to sell the Audi if things don't improve. That sounds tough, I said. Welcome to the real world. 3 months later, I got a year-end bonus. The same week, my offer on a modest 3-bedroom house was accepted. The day after I closed, my cousin Megan, one of the few relatives who'd stayed neutral, called me. I just thought you should know, she said quietly. Your parents got the foreclosure notice. Jackson sold the Audi, but the money's already gone. I thanked her and sat alone in my new living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes. For a brief moment, I considered reaching out. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my father. Heard you bought a house. Nice to know you have money for yourself while your family faces homelessness. Real class act, Olivia. Any lingering doubt evaporated. I blocked his number. 6 months after I walked away, I'm settled. Thriving. In a home I paid for myself. In a career that finally gets my full energy. In a relationship that feels balanced, not transactional. My parents are in a small apartment. Jackson is couch surfing and blaming everyone but himself. They still tell anyone who will listen that their eldest daughter abandoned them. What they never mention is how they abandoned me first. Emotionally, financially, quietly, over decades. Yesterday, I received a card in the mail. No return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. We're still your family. When you're ready to make amends, we'll be waiting. I laughed out loud in my kitchen. They still don't get it. They never will. Family isn't a word you use when you need something. It isn't a one-way street where one person gives until they're empty. What we had wasn't family. It was parasitic. I tore up the card and threw it away, feeling nothing but calm certainty. The Bank of Olivia didn't just close. It went out of business, permanently.